The future of work is here. This is a really great opportunity for you to redefine your employee value proposition. Companies that are putting their people first are going to emerge from this a lot stronger. Are you being honest? Are you being truthful? Are you being honest about what you do know and what you don't know? Employees are going to remember that experience.
Hi, I'm Bogdan, and it's a pleasure to have on the show today Marc Butler, former CEO at BNY Mellon Albridge, currently serving on the Fintech boards and an advocate for leading by putting people first. So it's a pleasure to have you today, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Bogdan. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity and appreciate having gotten to know you over the last couple of months.
Thank you. I would love to hear more from you about your background and experience as an executive leader. So please share with us a short intro about your background.
Yeah, my background has largely been in the wealth management space and really at the intersection of finance and technology. I realized a long time ago that technology was going to emerge as a driving force in the finance space. And so what many people call Fintech today, I've been pretty involved with for most of my career. More recently, I was the Chief Operating Officer and Managing Director with BNY Mellon Albridge. And as you mentioned before, really one of my leadership hallmarks has been putting people first, which is getting a lot of play during this COVID-19 pandemic.
So the theme for today's talk is managing resilience and making tough decisions in times of crisis. I'd love to hear from your perspective, what should and when should an executive leader or business owner start building a resilience plan in the face of a crisis?
Well, the good news is most leaders have been pretty good, especially in larger companies, at building resilience plans. But most of those plans have really been designed for a disruption in the business. They really haven't been designed for a pandemic. And so we're in largely uncharted territory, especially here in the United States. I think in Asia, they've been a little bit more prepared from a pandemic standpoint, just because they've gone through similar types of things in the past, nothing to this extent. But, this is a new, like I said, uncharted territory for most leaders here in the US.
You talked about large companies, but how should a startup behave in this time compared to an established business that has already some systems going on?
Yeah, most larger businesses, corporate cultures, especially if you get into banking and financial services, they have a lot of folks that are supporting leaders in, business disruption, planning for those types of things, scenario planning. And so, my advice to startups who are usually lean in terms of numbers of people is to really get the leadership team together to think through these things and have some well thought out plans so that you don't get caught flat-footed. There's a firm that a startup Fintech that I've been talking to recently that has really gotten caught flat-footed in this environment and just did not have the right plans in place, whether it's been business operations, their employees, how they face off with the clients. And so there's some good lessons to be learned, I think, for everyone, but probably most specifically with startups.
So with this sudden transition to shelter in place and to remote working, what are some key aspects that the executive team should consider when replicating the usual office environment in a remote environment?
Yeah, there's a number of things, and better than most that this remote work environment. I mean, you as well as others in the technology startup space have really been working this way for a number of years. So some of this isn't new because this is how you've been working, not only here within the US, but also across the world. There was a really nice piece that an associate, a consultant at Slalom Consulting put together last month that I had shared on LinkedIn, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in actually seeing the piece, they can email me or message me on LinkedIn. But I'll just hit on a couple of the points that she had mentioned. One is the end users. So think about your employees and what the employee experience is going to be. Manager preparation. Are the managers prepared? Are they in support of working differently? The employees are going to really look to the managers to lead them through this difficult time. And are the managers prepared? Will they have answers to the questions? Guidelines. There's a lot of companies that remote work. This is really new to them. There's very large companies here in the US that haven't really been set up for remote work. And so this is really a new way of working for them. What are the guidelines? When do managers and leaders expect employees to be online and available? What might be going on outside of the work that an employee might be doing that a manager or leader needs to take into consideration? I mean, look, in this environment, you have a lot of instances where parents are now having to serve as part-time teachers to help their kids get through the school day. So there's some interesting things that we've never encountered before. Another one is setting up a support framework. So, if somebody needs help, if somebody's not great in using the technology or isn't comfortable with it, where are they going to go? And that leads into some of the don'ts, some of the things that you don't want to do. Just releasing software and expecting that people are going to be able to remote work and they're going to be productive from the first minute on, it's probably not going to be the case. And, as I mentioned, some companies have really stumbled with doing this because they weren't prepared for it. It's not something that's been part of their culture. So they've had a hard time with it. Not having the support. I talked about the need to have support. Not having that support is going to create problems. People aren't going to be productive. They're not going to be confident in, the leadership of the company to get them through this if they're not able to work in a productive manner. And then as an extension of that is just expectations. Don't expect people to be experts immediately in doing it. I've seen just in some of my own interactions, people stumbling with the Zoom cameras and not knowing how it works, and the volume is wrong, the audio's off. There's all sorts of challenges with being able to work remotely that companies are challenged with. So, like I said, those are some guidelines that this consultant at Slalom had put together that I thought were very good.
So, now that they're adapting, do you have in mind a time period while this transition will go on for them? Not in terms of shelter in place, but more in terms of people adapting to the new realities.
Yeah, look, I think the future of work is here. And as you know, and as many startups know, you've been operating in this future of work. And, the future of work has been well documented over time. People are working remotely. There's whole companies today that everyone's remote. And I know that that's not, comfortable for a lot of companies out there, but I think what we'll ultimately move to is a hybrid where you're going to have people in offices. Maybe sometimes they're going to be working remotely. I think you'll have a greater appreciation for the ability for people to work remotely. Companies that have avoided hiring people that only work remote, I think they're going to think differently about it. I think they've, largely cut themselves off from a lot of talent that's in the marketplace by saying that we exclusively want people in an office. Collaborating online, I mean, that's a huge part of the future of work, doing interviewing over video, something a lot of companies weren't comfortable with. They were doing phone interviews or in-person interviews, but doing video interviews, from feedback I've gotten, has been really effective. So the future of work is here, and it's here to stay. And we're probably going to stop calling it the future of work at some point because, like I said, the future is here.
I'd love also to touch on maybe some tougher decisions that a business leader or the exec team need to take in the face of a crisis. So it kind of affects the business operations running. So he or they must ensure that this doesn't happen. And in your perspective, what are some do's and don'ts? And if we have to do the hard cut, how do we do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of businesses are faced with that today, and I'll talk about a couple of examples. But I think there's two components to it that are really important. One is the people. We've already talked a lot about the people. And so companies that are putting their people first are going to emerge from this a lot stronger. They're really going to redefine their employee value proposition. And the companies that don't, this is going to be a memorable experience. How people feel through this, how they feel about how they've been treated by their employer, or how their employer has led them through this, they're going to remember that for a long time. The second component is the customers. How are the customers going to feel through this? And again, there's no playbook necessarily, in large part, for a pandemic, but what are you going to do differently in terms of your standard decision making? Are you going to think differently about policies that you've had in place that affect customers? And again, much like employees, customers are going to remember how you made them feel through this. And so I think, putting employees first, putting customers first, really important through this time. The third piece of this that's really important as you think about making tough decisions is communication. And so if you have to make a tough decision, are you communicating it effectively to your employees? Are you communicating it effectively to your clients? Are you being honest? Are you being truthful? Are you being honest about what you do know and what you don't know? And so I think people are looking for that transparency. They're looking for leaders who are authentic and show their authentic selves. There are tough decisions. I'll give you an example. There's a local business here in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where, the owner of the company just decided he was going to stop paying his people. And he didn't tell his people that was the decision that he was going to make. And we have a friend who's been an 18-year employee of this company, has been committed, has endured some tough times with this company, and all of a sudden they just stopped getting paid. And so, like I said, those are things employees are going to remember, how you made them feel as our clients and customers.
So we touched a little bit on what to do to keep people in the transparent zone, so that they have the right expectancy of what's going to happen next. I would have an additional question about productivity, engagement, motivation. How do we do this in these times of crisis? And how could these sudden transitions that everybody's been talking about affect the employee experience? And when is the right point in time to start to develop an individual resilience plan?
Well, the time, at least as it relates to this pandemic, was a month to month and a half ago from an individual standpoint. And when we talk about putting people first leaders uh, they know people at an individual and a personal level. And so this is personal, right? People are working from home. They have kids. Their kids are trying to do schoolwork from home. There's a lot of challenges that people are facing outside of their work environment and their work experience. And so I think, real people first leaders understand the challenges. They're not expecting that people are going to be online or on a video, 12 hours a day. There's going to be points in the day where they're just not going to be able to do that. So I think that piece, empathy, really important for leaders and for managers through this. And like I said, really understand on a personal level what people are going through, what they have to endure, and in some cases, giving them room to maneuver and operate. And this kind of comes back to your last question. Employees are going to remember that. I mean, the managers and leaders that really understood what was going on, they're going to remember that experience. And so I think it's important for leaders and managers to understand that. The other thing I think that's important for leaders is to still continue to define why the work that we're doing is important. People feel a sense of pride if they know that the work they're doing, the contributions they're making are important, either in the context of the company and the team or in the context of serving clients, or both. And so I think reminding them that the work that they're doing is important, who it's serving, why it's important to those customers during this time, I think that that's really important. And then lastly, I think for leaders, and I mentioned this to a leader I was speaking to yesterday, a leader in financial services, and I said to him, this is a really great opportunity for you to redefine your employee value proposition. This has changed a lot of things in terms of how we interact with employees. Like I said, the future of work, our hiring potentially of remote workers, but the employee value proposition, how is that changing? How are you redefining it? And if you don't have one, now's the time to put one together. And I would just mention here as well, I think from an employee development engagement standpoint, certainly solutions like Nestor are huge during this time. And, it really helps drive consistency in that employee experience when people are remote. And so, the opportunity to have a live in-person one-on-one, well, we're not able to do that right now. Mm-hmm. But, we're able to do that over video. We're able to use solutions like Nestor to be able to document, what we talked about in the one-on-one, what the next steps are. And so I think, technology solutions are a huge part of the future of work. And I think, hats off to you and your team for what you've built, because it's going to have a significant impact.
Thank you. How in your perspective should exactly leaders and business owners deal with the uncertainty? So there's clear an uncertainty in the next steps. How should they tackle this, and how should they present it to the rest of the company?
I think the communication, like I said, is really important. And if you think about some really good examples during this event, I think it was the CEO of Marriott who did a video that went out to his employees, and it was touching, right? I mean, he was very emotional about what he was talking about and the impact that the pandemic and the decisions they were going to have to make were going to have on their business. And the hotel business has been, completely devastated through this. And so that to me was really authentic. And he was very clear about what he knew, the decisions that they were probably going to have to make or that they had already made. He was also clear about what he didn't know and the unknown. And so I thought that that was a really good example of a leader who showed empathy, was in touch with his people, knew the impact, and and he personally felt that when he delivered his message. You've seen other leaders that have decided for whatever reason that this work from home thing, well, we're not gonna do that, and oh, by the way, we're not going to equip our people with what they need to protect them on the job. And so you've seen people protesting that and trying to lead protests.
Mm-hmm.
Talked to someone yesterday who has a boss who is insistent that he doesn't want people working from home, and it's a small company, and the boss is actually, the owner of the company has actually asked people to start coming back into the office next week. And so person that I spoke with, who is the treasurer of the company, is very uncomfortable with this. And again, this just goes back to, are you showing the right level of empathy? Are you putting people first? At the end of the day, people are going to remember how you made them feel.
So to summarize this, it's empathy, it's authenticity, and transparency.
All of the above. Really, really important. And it really comes back to, what those of us who've had a people first leadership style have been talking about for many years. And so I think this is the moment when we move away from the kind of old school command and control environment, and we start leading for a different age, for a different group of employees. And this is the event that's really gonna be the agent to change all of that.
So one last point to touch on today. In your perspective, what's the effects that this transition and this COVID-19 crisis is going to have on businesses and on operations, on everything, on the long term? Will companies revert back to their old ways after this is all over, or will they start a new, more future of work oriented way?
Well, we talked about this before. I think it's really changed for forever. And I think the companies that, decide that they don't want to move towards the future of work, I think there's a price to be paid for that. And, are you going to be able to draw the talent that you need in order to be successful going forward? Are you going to be able to draw in the youth and the new ideas that you need if you look like a company that's operating in an old environment? And so I think companies are going to have to really think hard about, if they were operating in sort of an old school way, they're going to have to think really hard about doing things differently. Firms that have been focused on the future of work, have been leveraging technology, have had remote workers, they're ready for this. They've been on video. I mean, you do it with your development team offshore. I mean, you've been doing it. So those companies are ready. The future is now. And like I said, at some point, we're not going to call it the future of work, because it's going to be the current state of work.
The present of work.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
So thanks so much, Marc, for joining us today. It was amazing to learn from your experience, and it was a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bogdan. I appreciate it, and look forward to catching up later this week.